My name is Suzanne Bellinson. I am the Vice President of Commercial Markets for Tempus. Tempus is a data and analytics company based in Chicago. I'm an epidemiologist by training, which makes me quite different than most of you in the room. I'm not a physician, and I'm not actually trained in AI or machine learning or data science. But I was a scientist, and then I went and worked for the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association for 10 years. And so even though I am no longer working in the payer space and I work for a data and analytics company, most of my time is spent thinking about how big data can be used to service providers, patients, and those in the commercial space, such as payers and benefit management companies and the like. So today, we're going to talk a bit about blockchain. I think while many people in the room here may have a very good idea of what blockchain is, I thought this slide was very representative of the way most people think about blockchain. It's a term that we hear thrown around in lots of conversations, right? Everybody seems to be talking about blockchain. It's become a buzzword. So I thought I'd spend just a few minutes at the beginning of this session to just give some blockchain basics, and then to also talk at a high level about a few of the applications for blockchain in healthcare, at least some of the things that people are talking about. And then I have the great honor to have two women here beside me who happen to be experts, which I am not. So let's just talk a little bit about blockchain. So as most of you know, blockchain was created in the cryptocurrency, early days of cryptocurrency, really as a companion to Bitcoin. And there are some very important attributes of blockchain that I thought we could just quickly discuss to level set on why this is a technology that people are pretty interested in. So one thing about blockchain is that it is transparent. Another thing about blockchain is that it is decentralized. And a third attribute that is important is that it's robust. So when we talk about a technology that is transparent, right, everybody who has access to the chain actually has access to all of the information on that chain, right? So everybody who's involved in a transaction has insight into what everybody else is seeing. The second piece that I mentioned is that it's decentralized, right? So initially this was created for cryptocurrencies, and there was one of the pushbacks and reason why cryptocurrencies became popular is that people were, particularly in other countries, are really not comfortable with the concept of a centralized bank. Right, so cryptocurrencies are managed by a network of individuals and network of computers, and so they are decentralized. The transactions are not approved by one entity, but by a group of entities. And then the third piece is that it's robust. So because the blockchain is transparent and it's decentralized and everything is time-stamped and everybody has access to all of that information, it is very, very hard for one individual user to go in and actually modify the chain without everybody else knowing that it occurred, right? So there is a security and a robustness to blockchain that is very appealing. Next slide, please. So when we think about some of the opportunities for blockchain and big data in healthcare, I just listed 5 here, which I'll quickly talk about. So one is in drug supply chain. Having the ability to be able to specifically track any particular lot of a drug shipment, and then not only the totality of the pill that you produced as a pharmaceutical company, but all of the component ingredients, and be able to track them by the lot and now location of where those pills were shipped. It's extremely important. And one of the ways in which we all understand how important that can be is when something gets recalled, right? We've had a number of recalls recently related to manufacturing and contamination in manufacturing processes. Blockchain actually allows you to pinpoint each and every pill and its location so that you can quickly recall those drugs. Claims adjudication and billing. So this is a contract and then being able to execute on that contract. So blockchain is actually really good for smart contracting. Blockchain is particularly good for transactional things. And obviously claims adjudication and billing is transactional. If you have contracts on a block, you can actually do real-time claims adjudication. You can print out explanations of benefits in real time at point of care, which can smooth many of the administrative processes that many of us are involved in. Provider credentialing, something that I'm sure is near and dear to many of your hearts. Provider credentialing, as you know much better than I, can be a very complicated process, one that is lengthy, and in times of natural disasters or other times of need where you need to get providers into hospitals quickly, having all of that information safe and secure on a blockchain makes it quick and easy for any new hospital to accredit those providers. Again, a very transactional process. Clinical trials and population health research, one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is actually the democratization of the clinical trials process. And blockchain can be very useful in that. If you have those clinical trial protocols all owned and managed across a blockchain, across a network, people can be admitted to clinical trials in a decentralized way, all managed across those who are viewing and approving those entrants, but it doesn't all have to happen at one particular institution. The last example that I have on here is health data exchange, and I do have an asterisk next to it because it's probably one of the more controversial in many ways applications for blockchain, but also I think one of the ones that holds a significant amount of promise. So whether people are talking about housing genomic information on a blockchain, right? So you as an individual who gets your genetic testing done, you now own that information instead of, you know, Foundation Medicine or Tempus or any particular hospital system owning it. And you can then, through that blockchain, actually provide people, institutions, providers, researchers access to your genome. Of course, part of the controversy here is that the amount of information is extremely large. And there are challenges with the size of that type of information. But the promise is incredibly great. Many of the things that we've heard over the last few days and some of the comments on the earlier panel were really specific to this, talking about how do we ease the workflow, how do we ensure that when you walk into a provider's office, they actually have all the information about you in front of them. So this is one of the exciting but probably less proximal applications of blockchain. So that's really all from me. I'm going to turn it over, Tatiana, to you first so that you can introduce yourself to the group, talk a little bit about what you're doing in blockchain.
Thank you. I don't know if it's on. Thrilled to be here. I don't know if I have my slides up, but okay, cool. So. What do you do when you get diagnosed with cancer? Well, I started a company, and the reason I started it was at that time I realized that health data in management is just broken. No one could tell me, why it was me who got cancer. And I used my background as in computer sciences and a lot of stuff that I've done at Pricewaterhouse and SAP practice. And my co-founder, who is an expert in AI and big data, and we built a platform that enabled creation of any type of digital solutions that have the same back end. So, and it was very important to us, where we can gather and integrate all kinds of health data and data that impacts causation, treatment, outcome of diseases, right? So for us, it was very important. Anything that we enabled for organizations to use had to be patient-centered. And in my view, patient-centered means a number of things. So one is it has to support omni-channel communications, meaning that patients have a right to access healthcare via communication channel of their choice. So it's not, oh, here's your chatbot, or here's an app, or anything else. They can move from one communication channel to another one without losing any data. Secondly, when you talk about patients, you're talking about not just the patient. You're talking about patient, caregiver, team of providers, and so on. So all of them should be able to access the same data from their own points of view, if you will. And lastly, there is no such a thing as one size fits all in healthcare. So everything that you give to patients has to be personalized. So we used all that concept. We developed a platform that enables all of that. It's white labeled, and we've been lucky enough to work with like UCSF, Cornell, American Heart Association, Health and Human Services. We deployed, and everything, again, has been deployed under their names, whatever makes sense for those companies to deploy in a rapid manner. And then we realized there is a gap. There was a gap, meaning that within the apps and chatbots and everything that has been built on our platform, we have access to tons of data. Data that patients were collecting within the app, health data. We have passive data, their location. We had information about their socioeconomics based on their zip code level and everything else. But there was no way for them to share that data. So it was within a chatbot or app or everything else. So we looked at what are the best ways to enable patients to share that data, whether it's provider or family member or care team, in the most meaningful way. And what we did, we built and we just launched and deployed Patient Sphere. So what does it do? On the one hand, it enables patients to have an integrated data dashboard within their app, if you will. And they can pull data based on their own consent from Apple Health, Google Health, from any wearable device, EMR, and we deploy AI to help patients using trained neural networks to make sense of that data. Then we enable patients to create revocable consent. The key is revocable, that they have control. If they don't want to share data, they can revoke it at any point of time. They can go on a field-by-field basis and decide who, when, how, what can do with their data. Then we built a middleware that you can see in the middle, Patient Sphere, that has 3 layers. So the first layer is highly secure, HIPAA compliant, distributed database. It's basically data lake that enables integration of all those dispersed data that related to health. Then we built patient identity management layer that sits on the blockchain. And I hope we'll have discussions on why you don't want to put health data on the chain itself. So it has hashes. So we use blockchain for exactly the same reasons that it was designed for, as a ledger. So it keeps track and enables you to see who, when, and what access to your data. And lastly, we built a very important layer, which is a metadata layer. So patients can consent to share de-identified metadata about themselves that can be searched and engaged, and will enable engagement with patients, whether it's for disease management, clinical trials, research, or all of the above. And on the flip side, we talked about a lot about physicians and how we want to enable them to do work more efficiently. And the last thing we want to do, suddenly, to give you tons of data that you don't have time to look at, right? So what we did, we built a smart integrated physician dashboard that has a lot of AI to highlight only exceptions and also give you some choices of potential treatments or advices that you can look at. We also build a way for anybody to create smart contracts in a very rapid and intelligent way, meaning you can say, I'm looking, for example, for a male of, about age 50 or younger who had heart attack, and we want to do some clinical trials on those patients. So through our metadata layer, that smart contract goes to the patients who fit in those, those search criteria, and they can look, oh, there is a company XYZ who is trying to who is asking me for my such and such data so many times a day for so many months. By the way, you can pay them if they adhere to whatever terms. And you can opt in. Once you opt in, you decide, yes, the match is made, it's a contract, it's a legal contract, and you can have an engagement. So that's in a nutshell of what our solution looks like today, and it has been deployed. So I'll be more than happy to tell you how it's been deployed.
Great. So let's hear a little bit from our next guest about the work that you're doing, and then Tatiana will come back and I think circle back to this question specifically around why you should or should not have health data on the blockchain itself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Iman Safari, and I started my career as a computer scientist over 20 years ago. Initially, unlike a lot of people here are working from the data angle, I actually came at it from the networks angle. I was a network architect beginning of my career, and then I worked initially purely in software development before going back to get my MBA and working in management consulting for several years. The interesting thing is over the years, I continuously gravitated back to healthcare. My first job was working actually for Verizon, one of the largest telecom companies in the United States, where they were rolling out their broadband services and looking for different industries to use them. And healthcare was one of the most kind of promising ones at the time because of the medical imaging utilization of broadband and networking. So we worked for several years on how do you, put networks and broadband at the service of healthcare organizations and change the way healthcare processes happen. And that was the beginning kind of teleradiology and remote kind of analysis of medical imaging for health diagnosis and other areas. A few years later, after finishing my MBA from Harvard Business School, we actually worked from management consulting initially with McKinsey, but then ended up joining a company that built the largest telemedicine network internationally for bringing in medical consultations from around the world to leading US hospitals. Again, the idea was to develop the protocols to support telemedicine across the world at the time. And it's taken many years, and if people who have been involved in telehealth and telemedicine know it's probably has not met the expectations initially of how far it was going to replace processes. And I think a lot of it has to do with some of the earlier conversation I heard here about it's not just about the technology, it's how do you integrate the processes into healthcare. And now kind of come full circle around here to the latest revolution in technology, which is blockchain. And I was told to give my introduction to blockchain, so I'll complement that. Can we move to the next slide? Just a quick one. Everybody sees it differently. I tried to do a very simple description of what it's about. To me, it's a system for sharing and managing valuables in a trust-free environment. And valuables can be virtual assets that are purely virtual assets, or could be information about physical assets. The trust environment is trust-free, meaning that you can't trust anyone. So you have to have a different system in place. And that is done through a distributed, replicated record of any relevant transaction or activity that is happening in the ecosystem you're in. The way that's achieved, it's a very difficult task if you think about it. Anything we do nowadays, we trust an intermediary of some sort or another. So try to do, for example, try to send email to somebody without an email server in the middle, or try to get access to your funds without a bank in the middle, or transfer it to somebody. Try to even share gossip about somebody on social media without an intermediary like Snapchat or Facebook or somebody. Everything we do, if you think about it, walk through it in your mind, involves an intermediary. So it's a difficult problem to solve. So those who are criticizing blockchain for 10 years and nothing accomplished, it's taken how long for the internet to get to where we are right now? I think we're just at the beginning of the journey. And just to close on the definition, the way we do things in the blockchain world is through what's called distributed consensus. Very difficult kind of algorithms and protocols that achieve the ability for individuals or entities that don't trust or often know each other across distributed networks to agree on and validate that something has happened and add it to their ledger. So that's really essentially what happens. Blockchain is being applied across many, many industries, and I'm here today because I'm involved in this world in two capacities. For one, I'm a co-founder of an organization in Southern California called the Los Angeles Blockchain Lab. If you're involved in this space, it would be an interesting one for you to pay attention to. We're a nonprofit. We are focused on building and growing the blockchain ecosystem in Southern California, working with academia, with government, and with private sector. We're partners with the 4 top universities in LA, including Caltech, UCLA, UCI, and USC. We work very closely with both the students and professors who are involved in this space. We're also working more and more actively with the city of LA and the mayor's office on not just building the ecosystem within Southern California, but creating bridges from LA to other cities in the US as well as internationally, particularly in Asia. This area is really becoming a big bridge to Asia vis-a-vis the blockchain ecosystem particularly. And we work both with enterprises that are trying to bring blockchain into their value chain, as well as startups that are looking for funding, looking for partnerships, and so on, as well as universities that are building the talent pool and growing the education kind of pipeline within their courses, both full-time as well as the extension schools. And of course, related to that is the ability to help all of the incoming talent that is going into the marketplace, be matched to the job opportunities that are there. So in addition to my nonprofit involvement, I'm a consultant in the generally business strategy, but also particularly in emerging tech with blockchain and AI. And over the past year, I've been working with a company called Oben out of Pasadena here, an Idea Lab, that has a very different spin on AI. We work on designing digital twins or versions of people. We create basically 3D avatars that look close to what you look like. They sound more and more like you, and increasingly are learning to behave more and more like real humans. And they are being put to use in different proofs of concept to assist in different industries. So one of them is healthcare, and that's the one I'm mostly involved in. So we are working on both the professional side of creating digital assistants in healthcare, as well as on the consumer or the patient side of looking at what are applications for healthcare, such as the ones that Tatiana was talking about. How do you create the identity of patients and users on the blockchain in a secure way so that they begin to own and permission their data to be shared for their own use. So I'd be happy to talk about either one, and I think the applications that you went through earlier for blockchain in healthcare are ones that are the most promising and interesting, and we can delve deeper into how the pharmaceutical industry is using them, or insurance, as well as the clinical side, which is the one I think is the most exciting.
Great. So I think you both talked about the clinical side, and so maybe starting with you, just mention what you really think is the most promising, the most proximal I think different sectors of healthcare are using blockchain in varied ways, but really, what do you think holds the most promise as sort of a transformational piece where blockchain is going to make an impact in healthcare?
I think the one that holds the most promise in terms of touching our lives is probably the one that has to do with putting the data in the hands of the consumers versus the professionals. And the large providers. It's also the most difficult to solve because there isn't a precedent for it. Whenever we think of health data, electronic health records and EMRs and so on, they were really created by and for healthcare organizations because they have a mandate to keep track of all the services they're providing and what's being produced, the data, both for various reasons, clinical, administrative, as well as insurance and so on. They are not really created for the users. The users get access to them with much difficulty, right? Often even with very automated and manual processes. If you ever want to, I moved to LA a year and a half ago from the East Coast after many, many years there, and literally it's still manual. You want to get your records, you have to write to them, you have often to pay to get your records on a CD and give it to you, or they send it to the healthcare provider. So it's a very difficult task, not designed for it, and even if it did, all the systems have to change, the legal systems, the administrative system, as well as the technical systems. So it's the toughest to solve. I find the most promising way where this is going right now is I think that the wellness industry is probably where things will start. So it's like health-related data, but it's not quite medical data. That's probably the first areas where it will begin to get built up. And if you use mobile devices and use, with both the Android and the iOS side, Apple has been a leader in bringing, kind of building health apps where you begin to, as a consumer, to collect your health data. It's not often very sensitive or medically, deep data. You don't have your medical imaging yet necessarily on your phone, but you do have a lot of current things. You might have your allergies on it. You might have medications on it, and you might have to enter it yourself or kind of do the hard work there. But I think that's beginning to lay the grounds, and they are actually making more and more inroads into beginning to connect to the healthcare providers to get the data onto the personal record. The caveat here is Apple is one large company, and you are moving your data to another intermediary to do. And the hope in the industry is that blockchain solutions will begin to emerge by entities that are creating that infrastructure, the intermediary infrastructure that is not controlled by one entity, but rather by you, the individual, where the personal health record is yours, and you are basically pulling data from different providers. So that's really, I think, is the most promising. It's not the closest to happen, but It is the one that is going to have the very large impact on people's lives.
Sometimes those things with the largest impact take a lot of time, as we've heard. Let
me just add that this, I don't know if it's on, probably not.
I think if you keep talking
move your
so what we see today, it's not done. What we see today, and again, we're basically deploying, and we have solutions that are publicly available that run on the blockchain. That anything that you do in healthcare has to be integrated. So you can't just come to a patient and say, oh, here's a data form, fill it in, and send us your data. That's not how it will be happening, right? So we're working across many diseases and chronic diseases and disease management. And what you realize that the only way where you can engage patient in their health care, whether it's on the wellness or disease management side, is to give them personalized solution that helps them to manage pretty much everything around their health. So it has to have information, for example, about their condition, assessments, medication adherence. It should be able to remind them when their next appointment is, and enables them to get data that they need and share that data. So if you just look at, oh, there is a blockchain, or there is a chatbot, or there is a piece of information I need from a patient, then the likelihood that patients will actually use that is small, because they have the whole disease management space. On the blockchain side, what we see where we deploy and have deployed it already is on disease management side. So imagine that you let people like go home after the surgery, and you really give them like piece of paper. Here's everything that you need to do. Now imagine if you can create a smart contract and enable patients to share some of the data, and it can even include the picture of the incision side of the surgery or anything else in an adaptive way where you can see exceptions that patient consent to share with you, analyze them, and physicians can intervene before patient, for example, goes into ER. On population health side, you can go to and we're working, we deployed in Spanish and other languages in neighborhoods where population health, it's real hard to reach to those people. You can create solutions that will help them, and you can pay them if they actually adhere to healthy lifestyle. We can, if they do certain number of steps, if they eat certain things, if they share their baseline health data, so you can encourage people to stay healthy. And that is, something that we're doing today across, again, many disease areas.
So in these examples, it sounds like blockchain really is enabling the secure sort of transfer and management of that information and the relationship between that provider and the patient or whoever may be accessing that information for research or other uses. I'm wondering if there's anybody in the audience who's utilizing blockchain or working in the blockchain space who has some interesting tidbits to share with us before we close.
Hi, my name is Jia Merkin, and great session. And I think security of data, especially in the medical field, this is what is needed in order to liberate that and be able to utilize it in a more open way. I have a little bit of a different topic to, so we do use blockchain integration of technology for security purposes. One of the things that we ran into is cost of transaction for validation, the time it takes for validation in certain applications, and also the abandon rate in certain cases where it's not validated, right? All issues I'm sure you guys all run into. So there's a saying, not all data is created equal, in the sense that all data is important and valid, but some not at the same. So the question is, there are other technologies like IOTA and Tangle. What are your opinions as far as you guys deploying it? We've have to use both types. What are your opinions on that?
I think I mentioned at the beginning that in our architecture, we don't store health data on a chain because it's not HIPAA compliant to start with. Right? So we kind of address the transaction speed and everything else by designing highly secure, highly efficient distributed data lake in different layers within that. So that was exact reason, first of all, HIPAA compliance, second, all the things you've mentioned, that we don't store health data on a chain. I think
when you mentioned IoT, right? That's IOTA, or as a platform, yeah, as a protocol. I think there's recognition right now. There's no one blockchain protocol that's going to basically dominate them all. They all have different purposes. So that's going to take some time for it to mature. But IOTA is one that serves a specific purpose for the the Internet of Things integration and so on. So there's a reason to use that. But there are others, depending on what the application is. One of the areas talking about off-chain storage that is, I think, very promising in terms of applications is the ability for researchers across whether it's private institutions or academic institutions to share data in a way where it's public, but like the chain of custody of who created the data and who owns it remains in the hands of the creator. There is one of the biology labs at Caltech, for example, the Jensen lab is doing that. They put the result of 15 years of research with their electromagnetic tomography machines on a blockchain platform. It's stored off-chain, but all the transactions are on-chain, and they basically share the data with other universities for research, because not all schools can afford this kind of equipment. So that's a great example of something where you're sharing very large sets of data off-chain, but the important metadata, which is costly when you're talking about the transaction costs there, can be on the chain. So I think it depends on what the intent is. For example, the company I'm working with, they're using a protocol called Project Pi, the Pi blockchain. Again, does decentralized storage. They did something very smart. They built the data storage using BitTorrent, which is a proven decentralized storage protocol, and all the transactions that are happening on the chain are, the standard kind of Bitcoin-like transactions, where you're just telling, the recipient that something has happened, and often associated with some sort of payment for the transaction, but the actual data and what's happening is completely off-chain. And we're using that, for example, again, in healthcare for we have a trial with medical surveys for remote patient monitoring that's happening. So we basically do not store the patient data on it, but just the fact that a survey has been completed and who the anonymized identity of the patient is stored as part of that. So you have to use each one for the kind of applications that are appropriate for it.
I just wanted, just 1 second, I wanted to add, so the way, again, like we all agreed that there is no single protocol that we know of will be the protocol, right? So the way we build our stack is it's agnostic to a specific chain, so it can move. So, and I think that's the right bet. So we deploy it on Ethereum. However, there is a layer that we've built that enables us to switch to whatever becomes next, because this is an emerging field. So you don't necessarily want to be married to one.
Thank you. So I just want to say thank you to both of you for joining me on the panel today, and thanks for providing the opportunity for me to moderate. This has been a great meeting. Happy to be here with all of you. Have a great rest of your day.